You know what keeps me up at night? It's not the ghost stories whispered in Lavender Town, or the strange experiments happening in Cinnabar Mansion. No, what haunts me is something far more insidious. Something hidden in plain sight. Something the Pokémon League has been covering up for decades. I'm talking about the Safari Zone. But before you click away, thinking this is just another video about catching rare Pokémon, let me ask you something. Have you ever stopped to wonder why the Kanto Safari Zone closed down so suddenly? Why Baoba, the warden, just disappeared without explanation? Why those special safari balls only work in that specific location? And why they function so differently from every other capture device in existence? What if I told you the Safari Zone wasn't a conservation effort at all, but rather a containment facility for a failed scientific experiment? What if those rare Pokémon weren't there by coincidence, but were the surviving subjects of something far darker? Something that went catastrophically wrong? Today, we're going deep. And I mean really deep, into what I believe is one of the biggest cover-ups in Pokémon history. The Great Safari Zone Crisis. Now, let me know in the comments if you've ever had your own strange experiences in any Safari Zone. And if you're enjoying this investigation, drop a like to help other trainers find the truth. If content like this interests you, consider subscribing because we're going to keep digging into the mysteries the League doesn't want you to know about. Let's start where every good mystery begins, with the technology that makes it all possible. The Safari Balls themselves are the first smoking gun. Think about it. These aren't just differently colored Pokeballs. They operate on fundamentally different principles than any other capture technology in existence. When you enter the Safari Zone in Kanto, you pay $500, and they hand you exactly 30 Safari Balls. Not 31, not 29, exactly 30. And here's where it gets weird. You can't bring your own Pokemon into the Safari Zone. You can't use your own Pokeballs. You're completely at the mercy of their proprietary technology. Marky, why? What are they afraid might happen if you brought in standard equipment? The capture mechanics of Safari Balls are unlike anything else. In a normal wild encounter, you weaken the Pokemon, maybe inflict a status condition, then throw a ball. Simple, effective, time-tested. But in the Safari Zone, you can't battle at all. Instead, you have three options. Throw a Safari Ball immediately, throw bait to make the Pokemon less likely to flee, or throw rocks to make it easier to catch but more likely to run. Now, the official explanation is that this maintains the safari experience, that it's more sporting or educational or whatever propaganda they feed you. But let me share what the data actually tells us. Safari Balls in Generation 1 function identically to Ultra Balls in terms of their catch rate modifier. They should have the same effectiveness. But there's a problem, a major problem, that the programmers clearly didn't account for. Due to how the random number generation works in the original games, Safari Balls actually underperform dramatically against high-level Pokemon at full health. The catch rate calculation involves multiple random number checks. And because of how the system was coded, the Safari Ball's effectiveness drops significantly compared to what it should be. For Pokemon like Chansey with a catch rate of 30 Twanker or Tauros, Kangaskhan, Scyther, and Pinsir with catch rates of 45. You're looking at capture probabilities far below what the League wants you to believe. But here's what really caught my attention. The stress mechanics. When you throw bait at a Pokémon in the Safari Zone, it enters an eating state for 2 to 6 turns. During this time, its catch rate is halved, but its likelihood of fleeing decreases. When you throw rocks, it becomes angry for 2 to 6 turns. Its catch rate doubles, but it's far more likely to run away. Think about that for a second. These Pokémon aren't just reacting naturally, but the Safari Ball technology is directly manipulating their psychological state. Rocks don't just make them easier to catch through physical means. The system is tracking anger counters, eating counters, modifying behavioral responses on a fundamental level. This isn't capture technology. This is behavioral modification technology. And that brings us to an uncomfortable question. What were they testing? According to official records, the Kanto Safari Zone was established as a preserve for rare Pokémon, a place where trainers could encounter species not found elsewhere in the region. Noble goal, right? Conservation, education, all very official. But let's examine which Pokémon actually live there. Chansey, a Pokémon with the highest HP stat in Generation 1, capable of learning Soft-Boiled, the ultimate recovery move. Extraordinarily rare, with most trainers never encountering one. Tauros, a Pokémon with incredible speed and attack stats, one of the most competitively viable normal types in existence. Found almost exclusively in the Safari Zone. Kangaskhan, a Pokémon that's born with its baby already in its pouch. Think about that biological impossibility for a moment. It doesn't evolve from anything. It doesn't evolve into anything. It just exists. Ming, with an offspring that never grows. After never leaves. Rate Scyther and Pinsir. Match version exclusives depending on your game. Bracerid, powerful bug types with exceptional stats for their typing. Dratini and Dragonair. The only dragon type evolutionary line in Generation 1. Pseudo-legendary Pokémon with stats that rival actual legendaries. Found only by fishing in one specific area of the Safari Zone. Notice a pattern? These aren't just rare Pokémon. These are Pokémon with exceptional, often unusual characteristics, extreme HP values, biological anomalies, pseudo-legendary power levels. Now, the official story is that these Pokémon naturally congregated in the Safari Zone due to its diverse habitats and protection from overcatching. But let me share something that completely undermines that narrative. In Generation 2, the Kanto Safari Zone is closed. Completely shut down. The sign outside reads, "The Warden is traveling abroad. Therefore, the Safari Zone is closed." Traveling abroad. That's it. That's the entire explanation. The Warden took a vacation, and they shut down one of the most profitable tourist attractions in Kanto. An entire preserve with rare Pokémon that trainers travel from across the region to visit just closed indefinitely because one man decided to take a trip. Does that make any sense to you? Because it doesn't make sense to me. Organizations don't close major facilities because one person leaves. They hire a replacement. They promote from within. They maintain operations, unless the warden wasn't just an administrator, unless his presence was essential because he was the only one who knew how to maintain whatever was really happening there. By Generation 4, when we return to Kanto, the Safari Zone hasn't reopened. Instead, in its place, we find Pal Park, a facility for transferring Pokémon from Generation 3 games. Let's think about what Pal Park actually is. It's a one-way transfer system. You migrate Pokémon from your Game Boy Advance cartridge to your DS game, and they can never go back. You select 6 Pokémon to transfer, and then you have to catch them again in a special catching show using Park Balls. Park Balls never fail. They have a perfect capture rate. Once you throw one at your transferred Pokémon, it's guaranteed to be caught. Now the official explanation is that this prevents you from losing Pokémon during the transfer process. But think about the implications. Pal Park uses a modified version of the Safari Zone's infrastructure, the same facility where behavioral modification technology was being tested. And it uses capture technology that literally cannot fail. What if Pal Park wasn't just a convenience feature? What if it was a containment protocol? But we're getting ahead of ourselves. First, we need to understand what happened in Kanto. And for that, we need to talk about the incident that almost destroyed the Safari Zone completely. There's an episode of the Pokémon anime that most people in the West have never seen. It's the episode 35. The Legend of Dratini. It was banned outside of Asia, and it's never been officially dubbed into English. The official reason for the ban? Gun violence. The episode features Kaiser, the Safari Zone warden, pointing a revolver at Ash and his friends multiple times. He threatens Team Rocket with firearms. There are scenes of guns being fired, all pretty intense for a kid's show. But I think the real reason this episode was banned has nothing to do with the guns. I think it's because it revealed too much. Let me tell you what happens in that episode. Ash and his friends arrive at the Safari Zone, excited to catch rare Pokémon. Kaiser, the warden, is immediately hostile. He's armed. He's paranoid. He threatens to shoot anyone who breaks the rules of the Safari Zone. When Ash and his friends notice a photograph of Kaiser as a young man holding a Dratini, everything changes. Kaiser becomes even more defensive. He denies that Dratini exist in the Safari Zone, but the photograph proves otherwise. Professor Oak explains the history. 30 years before the episode takes place, Kaiser discovered a Dratini in the Safari Zone. Word spread. Trainers from all over flocked to the area. In their desperation to catch the legendary dragon type, they caught massive numbers of other Pokémon. They destroyed habitats. They wrecked the ecosystem. The Safari Zone was literally trashed by an influx of trainers who didn't care about conservation. The official response? Implement the Safari Ball system. Restrict how many Pokémon could be caught. Limit the time trainers could spend inside. Create rules that, if broken, would result in Kaiser shooting you. That's the official story. An environmental disaster caused by overzealous trainers, leading to new restrictions. But let me ask you something. If this incident happened 30 years before Ash's journey, and Ash's journey takes place roughly 3 years before the Safari Zone closes in Generation 2. We're talking about an event that occurred approximately 33 years before the facility's closure. For 33 years, the Safari Zone operated under these strict rules. For 33 years, Kaiser remained as warden, armed, paranoid, protective. What was he protecting? The episode shows us, deep in the Safari Zone, in a place called Dragon Valley, there's a lake. And in that lake lives not just a Dratini, but a Dragonair, the evolved form. The Dratini from Kaiser's photograph had evolved, and it had a child. Team Rocket, after holding Kaiser at gunpoint and forcing him to reveal the location, attempts to bomb the lake to force all the Pokémon to the surface. But Dragonair protects them. The Dragon-type Pokémon demonstrates incredible power, and Kaiser's decades of paranoia suddenly makes sense. He wasn't protecting the Safari Zone from trainers. He was protecting trainers from what was in the Safari Zone. But here's what the episode doesn't explain. Here's what you have to read between the lines to understand. Dratini and Dragonair are pseudo-legendary Pokémon. In the games, they're incredibly rare. They appear at extremely low encounter rates in very specific locations. They have catch rates of 45, the same as other rare Safari Zone Pokémon. But in Pokémon Yellow, something changes. Dragonair becomes available in the Safari Zone, not through normal encounters in grass, through fishing at level 15. Think about that. Dratini evolves into Dragonair at level 35. But Wild Dragonair can be found at level 15, 20 levels before they should be able to exist. That's not how evolution works. That's not how any of this works. Unless the Dragonair in the Safari Zone weren't naturally occurring. Unless they were the result of experiments, forced evolution, genetic manipulation. And that brings us to the real horror. The thing they've been covering up. Baoba, the warden, wasn't just a conservationist. He was a scientist. The Safari Zone wasn't a preserve. It was a laboratory. Every Pokémon in that facility was there for a reason. Chansey with its impossible HP and healing abilities. Kangaskhan with its biological paradox of an eternally infant offspring. Tauros with its competitive viability and aggressive nature. Dratini and Dragonair with their pseudo-legendary power levels and impossible level distributions. They were all test subjects. And the Safari Ball technology, that wasn't capture equipment. It was behavioral modification equipment. Equipment designed to manage test subjects who were becoming unstable. Equipment that could manipulate their psychological states, make them docile, make them aggressive, study their responses. Wait, the step limit wasn't to create a sporting challenge. It was a safety protocol. 500 steps in Generation 1. 600 in Fire Red and Leaf Green. Just enough time to observe behavioral responses before you had to be evacuated. The 30 Safari Ball limit wasn't arbitrary. It was a containment measure. Exactly 30 attempts to capture a subject before the session ended. No more, no less. Perfect for data collection. And the fact that you couldn't bring your own Pokémon, That wasn't for the safety of the wild Pokémon. That was for your safety. If something went wrong, if one of the test subjects became hostile, you needed to be defenseless enough that evacuation was the only option. Think about Kaiser's behavior in the band episode. The gun wasn't for protection against trainers, it was for protection against the Pokémon. When things go wrong in a research facility filled with genetically modified pseudo-legendary dragon types, you don't call security. You carry a firearm. Now let's talk about what happened after the Kanto Safari Zone closed. Baoba didn't just take a vacation, he fled. He took his research and his knowledge, and he established a new facility, the Kanto Safari Zone. But this time, things were different. This time, he built in failsafes. The Kanto Safari Zone has no step limit. None. You can stay as long as you want, until you run out of safari balls or choose to leave. Why the change? Because the time pressure was causing behavioral problems. The test subjects in Kanto had become too stressed. The constant influx of trainers with limited time created an environment of perpetual agitation. The Kanto Safari Zone also introduced a new mechanic, customizable areas. You can rearrange the 6 zones of the facility, move them around to suit your needs. But more importantly, you can place objects in each area. Blocks that attract specific Pokémon. Forest objects. Plains objects. Peak objects. Water objects. Each one modifies the encounter tables. Each one draws out different species. And here's the truly disturbing part. Some Pokémon require the areas to be active for specific numbers of days before they'll appear. Preferred Big Pam, for example, to encounter Bagan in the swamp area, the area must be active for 110 days. Morpherbega 110 days. Why would wild Pokémon require an area to be active for months before they appear? Unless they're not appearing at all. Unless they're being grown, matured, developed over time. The objects aren't attracting Pokémon. They're providing the environmental conditions necessary for whatever process is creating these Pokémon to complete. Baoba took his failed Kanto experiment and he refined it, made it more controlled, more systematic. The Kanto Safari Zone isn't a preserve, it's Kanto 2.0, the second iteration of his research, and it gets worse. Let's look at Hoenn. The Hoenn Safari Zone operates differently than Kanto or Johto. You still pay $500, you still get 30 safari balls, you still have a 500 step limit, but there's a new requirement. You must have a Pokéblock case to enter. Pokéblocks are crafted from berries. They enhance contest stats. They can be used to attract Pokémon in the Safari Zone by placing them in feeders throughout the facility. But think about what Pokéblocks actually are. They're concentrated berry compounds that modify Pokémon characteristics. They enhance condition, they alter behavior, they affect how Pokémon respond to training. Sound familiar? The Hoenn Safari Zone requires you to bring behavioral modification compounds as a condition of entry. Not optional, mandatory. And there's something else. In Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, the Safari Zone mechanics change completely. The Safari game is removed. The entire facility becomes a normal wild area. You can battle Pokémon, use your own Pokeballs, bring your own team. Why the change? I believe it's because by Generation 6, the League had finally gotten what they wanted from the Safari Zone experiments. The research was complete. The data had been collected. There was no longer any need to maintain the facade. Look at what was introduced in Generation 6. Mega Evolution. A temporary transformation that dramatically increases a Pokemon's power, but requires a strong bond between trainer and Pokemon. It causes the Pokemon physical changes, energy manifestations, type modifications in some cases. What if Mega Evolution wasn't discovered? What if it was engineered? What if decades of research in Safari Zone facilities, studying behavioral modification, analyzing pseudo-legendary Pokemon, experimenting with evolution triggers and genetic manipulation, led to the development of technology that could force temporary evolution beyond natural limits? Mari. The Mega Stones and Keystones required for Mega Evolution were said to be formed from a super ancient Pokemon's energy during the Kalos War 3,000 years ago. But that's the story they want you to believe. What if those stones were synthesized? What if they were the end result of everything that happened in Kanto, Johto, and Hoenn? But let me bring this back to the original question. What went wrong in Kanto? We know the Safari Zone closed. We know Baoba fled. We know the facility was converted to PAL Park, a transfer system using capture, technology that cannot fail. I believe there was an outbreak, not a disease, not a natural disaster, but a failure of the behavioral modification systems. Think about those rare Pokemon: Chansey, Tauros, Kangaskhan, Scyther, Pinsir, Dratini, Dragonair, all of them subjects of research. All of them exposed to Safari Ball technology designed to manipulate their psychological states. What happens when you repeatedly stress test subjects for decades? What happens when you modify their behavior? Make them angry, make them docile, cycle them through emotional states hundreds of times per day as trainers attempt to catch them. They break. I believe that in the final years of the Kanto Safari Zone's operation, the Pokemon began exhibiting signs of severe psychological damage, increased aggression, unpredictable behavior. The systems that were meant to keep them contained were failing. And one day, something triggered a cascade failure. Maybe it was the dragon types, Dratini and Dragonair with their pseudo-legendary power levels and altered development. Maybe they evolved. Maybe one of them became Dragonite, a Dragonite that had been raised in captivity, subjected to behavioral modification technology, repeatedly stressed by capture attempts, with all the power of a pseudo-legendary and none of the stability. That would explain Kaiser's paranoia. That would explain his guns. That would explain why he protected Dragon Valley with such desperate fervor. He knew what would happen if an unstable Dragonite ever escaped. And I believe that's exactly what happened. The incident wasn't recorded. It was covered up, classified, hidden behind the convenient excuse of the warden traveling abroad. But the evidence is there if you know where to look. When PAL Park replaced the Safari Zone, It wasn't a simple conversion. The entire facility was restructured. The catching show area was divided into 5 distinct zones: field, forest, pond, sea, and mountain. Each one isolated. Each one monitored. And those park balls that never fail, they're not just convenient, they're essential. Because the Pokémon being transferred through Pal Park needed to be contained immediately. No chance of escape. No possibility of failure. The 24-hour lockout between migrations wasn't to prevent abuse. It was a safety cooldown, time to ensure the facility was decontaminated, time to verify that nothing had gone wrong. Pal Park was built on the ruins of a disaster, and it used technology refined from the very experiments that caused that disaster. Now let's look at the Sinnoh region's equivalent, the Great Marsh. Located near Pastoria City, the Great Marsh operates on Safari Zone principles, but with key differences. You can watch Pokémon from observation platforms. You can take a special train between areas. You navigate through mud that slows your movement. The mud mechanics are particularly interesting. When you step into mud, you get stuck. You have to move repeatedly to free yourself. Each movement counts as a step toward your limit. On the surface, it seems like an environmental challenge. But think about what it actually does. It traps you temporarily, forces you to remain in one place, wastes your time. What if the mud isn't a natural feature? What if it's a containment mechanism? If something goes wrong in the Great Marsh, if a Pokémon becomes aggressive or unstable, the mud provides a way to slow evacuation. Anyone in the facility would be restricted in their movement, easy to locate, easy to account for. The observation platforms serve a similar purpose. They're sold as tourist features, ways to watch Pokémon safely from a distance. But they also serve as evacuation points, elevated structures where trainers can gather if ground-level containment fails. And the train system, it doesn't just connect areas for convenience. It creates a controlled flow of people. Everyone boards at specific locations. Everyone travels along predetermined routes. Everyone can be tracked. Monitored, contained if necessary. The Great Marsh is the 3rd iteration. Kanto failed. Johto refined the research. Sinnoh implemented full containment protocols. But here's what's really disturbing. In Generation 8's Crown Tundra DLC, we're introduced to Dynamax adventures. You explore dens, where Dynamax energy causes Pokémon to become enormous and powerful. You can't bring your own team. You're given rental Pokémon. Mythical. You navigate through unknown paths, and you catch Pokémon using special mechanics that don't follow normal rules. Sound familiar? Dynamax Adventures is Safari Zone mechanics applied to legendary Pokémon. You can't use your own team. You rely on special rules. Everything is controlled, monitored, contained. What if the Safari Zone research never stopped? What if every generation's gimmick, Mega Evolution, Z-moves, Dynamax, Gigantamax, Terastalization, all of them stem from that original research in Kanto? Experiments in behavioral modification and evolutionary manipulation. Testing how far Pokémon could be pushed beyond natural limits. all of it starting in a seemingly innocent preserve for rare species. And the League has been covering it up for decades. They buried the Kanto outbreak. They sanitized Baoba's history. They converted the disaster site into a transfer facility. Great. They refined the research in Johto and Sinnoh. They eventually weaponized it. Think about the implications. Every time you use a Mega Stone, you're using technology refined from Safari Zone experiments. Every time you Dynamax in a stadium, you're participating in a system built on decades of research that started with behavioral modification of captive test subjects. The Safari Zones weren't preserves. They were the foundation of modern Pokémon battling technology. And they're still out there. Johto's Safari Zone still operates. Areas still require activation periods of over 100 days. Objects still draw out specific species. Trainers still pay $500 for 30 Safari Balls and no step limit. Hoenn's Safari Zone was deactivated in its remake, but the facility still exists. The research was simply moved elsewhere. Unova, Alola, Galar, Paldea. None of them have Safari Zones, because they don't need them anymore. The research is complete. The technology has been integrated into standard League operations. But the question remains. What happened to the Pokémon from the Kanto Safari Zone? When the facility closed, where did they go? Some might have been transferred to Johto, others released into the wild. But the most concerning possibility, the one that keeps me searching for answers, is that some of them are still there. In the abandoned sections of what's now Pal Park, in sealed off areas that trainers can't access, in containment chambers built to house the failures. The experiments that went too wrong to ever be released. A Dragonite driven mad by decades of behavioral modification. Chansey with HP values so high, they effectively can't be defeated. Tauros herds whose aggression was amplified beyond control. Kangaskhan whose offspring never aged because their evolutionary development was artificially arrested. All of them still there, still contained, still secret, and the League hopes you never ask questions. They hope you accept the official story. A preserve for rare Pokémon. Closed for a warden's vacation. Replaced by a convenient transfer system. But now you know the truth. Or at least, you know what they've been hiding. The Safari Zone crisis wasn't just an ecological disaster. It was a scientific catastrophe, an ethical nightmare, and the cover-up continues to this day. Every time a new battle gimmick is introduced, ask yourself where it came from. Every time the League introduces new technology, question its origins, because the pattern is clear. They take wild Pokémon. They modify them. They push them beyond natural limits. And when something goes catastrophically wrong, they close the facility, change the name, start again somewhere else. Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, Sinnoh. The Great Safari Zone crisis wasn't a single event. It was the beginning of a pattern that's been repeating for generations. And it's still happening. But there's more, so much more. Let me tell you about the Pokémon themselves. About what the data reveals when you dig deep enough. Remember those strange level distributions I mentioned? Dragonair at level 15 when it shouldn't be able to exist until 35. That's just the beginning. In the Kanto Safari Zone, Pokémon levels are carefully controlled. Most species appear at consistent level ranges. 22 to 28 for common encounters. 23 to 26 for rares. But there are anomalies. In Pokémon Yellow specifically, Chansey can appear at level 7. Level 7. The probability is 1 in 100, ridiculously rare, but it exists. Why would a level 7 Chansey be in the Safari Zone? Chansey are already among the rarest Pokémon in the world. Finding one at all is remarkable. But finding one at such a low level? It suggests breeding, controlled reproduction, taking newly hatched subjects and immediately introducing them to the facility. But Chansey's breeding presents another problem. In later generations, we learn Chansey evolves from Happiny when leveled up while holding an oval stone during the day. It's a happiness evolution, requiring affection and care. How do you breed Pokémon that require happiness to evolve in a research facility? A facility where they're subjected to repeated stress testing, where their behavioral states are artificially manipulated. Unless the evolution requirements weren't always the same. Unless the Chansey in the Safari Zone evolved through different means. Artificial means. Let's talk about Tauros. In that band episode I mentioned, Ash catches 30 Tauros. Not 29, not 31, exactly 30. Every single Safari ball he threw, every single capture attempt, all of them resulted in catching a Tauros. The episode plays this for comedy. Ash trying to catch other species, but a Tauros always getting in the way. But think about what it implies. Tauros are extremely rare in the games. In Red and Blue, their encounter rate in most Safari Zone areas is 1%. 1%. Finding even one is difficult. Finding 30 should be statistically impossible within the 30 Safari ball limit. Unless they weren't rare at all. Unless the encounter tables were manipulated. Unless the Tauros were specifically directed toward trainers. Why? What if Tauros were the control group? In any experiment, you need control subjects. Baseline data to compare against your modified specimens. Tauros are normal type, strong but not exceptional, fast but not legendary, aggressive but manageable. They're perfect control subjects. And if you're running a decades-long study on behavioral modification and evolutionary manipulation, you need lots of control data. You need large sample sizes. You need trainers to catch them repeatedly so you can study how capture affects their development. But in Ash catching 30 Tauros wasn't comedy. It was the system working as designed. Nat providing control subjects to a trainer's PC boxes where they could be monitored remotely. Because here's something else to consider. Where do Pokémon in PC boxes actually exist? The games tell us they're stored digitally, converted to data, held in a network. But who maintains that network? Who has access to that data? The Pokémon League. Every Pokémon you store in Bill's PC system, or Lynette's in Hoenn, or Brigette's in Kalos, all of them pass through infrastructure controlled by the League. What's stopping them from collecting data on every Pokemon ever captured? From analyzing development patterns? From using every trainer as an unwitting research assistant? You catch a Safari Zone Pokemon, store it in your PC, and the League gets a complete dataset. Health values, stats, move development, behavioral responses, all of it logged, analyzed, used to refine their research. The Safari Zone wasn't just a research facility. It was a data collection operation at scale. Now let's examine the timeline more carefully. The banned episode states that Kaiser discovered Dratini 30 years before Ash's journey. Let's call that Year Zero. Year Zero, Kaiser discovers Dratini. News spreads. Trainers flock to the Safari Zone. Ecological disaster ensues. Safari Ball system implemented. Year 30. Ash visits the Safari Zone. Kaiser is still Warden, still armed, still protecting Dragon Valley. The Dratini has evolved into Dragonair and has offspring. Year 33. Generation 2. Safari Zone closed. Baoba travelings abroad. Year 37. Generation 4. Pal Park operational. Johto Safari Zone opened by Baoba. 3 years between Ash's visit and the closure. What happened in those 3 years? Parveen, I believe the incident I theorized about earlier occurred during this window. Bergson, something went catastrophically wrong. Something that forced immediate shutdown. But here's what's interesting. In Pokemon Adventures manga, we get a different perspective. The manga shows the Safari Zone operating normally during the events of Fire Red and Leaf Green. Red visits it, catches Pokemon. No major incidents. But manga and games exist in separate continuities. Different timelines. Different outcomes. What if the manga shows us what was supposed to happen? The ideal timeline where the research proceeded without catastrophic failure. And the games show us the reality. The timeline where something went wrong. Where the facility had to close. Where evidence had to be buried. Multiple universes. Multiple timelines. Some where the Safari Zone succeeded. Some where it failed. In Mega Evolution, requiring alternate timeline energy from parallel worlds suddenly makes sense. Because the research that led to Mega Evolution existed across multiple realities, succeeded in some, failed in others. The stones that enable transformation, pulling energy from those successful timelines to compensate for failures in ours. But I'm speculating. Let me bring this back to concrete evidence. The Pokéblock requirement in Hoenn's Safari Zone isn't arbitrary. Let me explain why it's so significant. Pokéblocks are made from berries. Each berry has different properties, different effects. When you blend them, you create compounds with specific characteristics. Spicy Pokéblocks raise coolness. Dry Pokéblocks raise beauty. Sweet Pokéblocks raise cuteness. Bitter Pokéblocks raise smartness. Sour Pokéblocks raise toughness. But these aren't just contest stats. They're personality modifiers. When you feed a Pokemon Pokéblocks, you're altering their fundamental nature. And the Hoenn Safari Zone requires you to have the ability to create these modifiers before entering. Why? Because the Pokemon in the Hoenn facility are more heavily modified than those in Kanto. They require more intensive behavioral management. The Pokéblock feeders scattered throughout the zone aren't for attraction. They're for maintenance. Think of it like medication. The Pokémon need regular doses of these compounds to maintain stable behavioral patterns. Without them, they might revert, become unstable, dangerous. Trainers aren't just bringing a convenience item, they're bringing a safety requirement. And in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, when the Safari game is removed entirely and the area becomes a normal route, that's not progress. That's abandonment. The research failed in Hoenn too. Whatever they were trying to achieve, it didn't work. So, they deactivated the special mechanics, released the remaining Pokémon into general population, and moved on. Another facility closed, another cover-up. Another iteration of the research moved to a new region. And this brings me to the most disturbing realization: every Safari Zone eventually closes or transforms. Kanto became Pal Park. Hoenn became a normal route. Johto is the only one still operating with full Safari mechanics, still requiring objects and activation periods, still carefully controlling which Pokémon appear and when. How long until Johto closes too? How long until Baoba travels abroad again? How long until they move the research somewhere else? Somewhere no one knows to look. Somewhere with even fewer witnesses. The pattern is clear: research, refinement, failure, closure, relocation, repeat. In each iteration, they learn more. Each iteration, they push further. Each iteration, they create more powerful modifications, until eventually they get what they want. Complete control over Pokémon evolution, complete control over power levels, complete control over species development. And then they won't need Safari Zones anymore. They'll have succeeded. That's why modern regions don't have them. Unova, Alola, Galar, Paldea. No Safari Zones, no special facilities, no obvious research operations, because the research went underground, became classified, integrated into standard League operations so completely that no one questions it anymore. Z moves in Alola, granted by ancient Pokémon but requiring specific poses and technology. Dynamax in Galar, triggered by power spots and controlled in special stadiums. Terastalization in Paldea, a phenomenon that changes type entirely, controlled by special crystals and hats, all of them following the same pattern. Special technology. Staggered the controlled conditions, the dramatic power increases, and origins that are never fully explained. Just like the Safari Zones, just like the behavioral modification research. The Great Safari Zone Crisis wasn't the end. It was the beginning. And we're still living with its consequences. Every modern battle gimmick. Bigger Main. Every power increase. Every new mechanic that pushes Pokémon beyond natural limits. All of it traces back to a facility in Kanto where rare Pokémon were subjected to decades of experimentation, where Safari Balls modified behavior, where level distributions defied logic, where dragon types lived underwater at impossible stages of development, where eventually something went terribly wrong, and the League decided that covering it up was easier than answering questions, so they closed the facility, sent the warden away, built a transfer system on the ruins, moved the research to Johto, and hoped everyone would forget. But I haven't forgotten, and now neither have you. The Safari Zone crisis is still happening. It never stopped. It just became invisible, hidden in plain sight, buried under layers of official narrative, disguised as innovation and progress. But if you look closely, the evidence is everywhere. In the mechanics that don't make sense, in the Pokémon that shouldn't exist, in the facilities that close without explanation, in a banned episode that showed too much, in a warden who carried a gun, in 30 safari balls that always catch Tauros. The truth is out there, and the League hopes you never find it. But you're looking now, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. The Safari Zone wasn't a preserve, it was a laboratory, and the experiment is still running. Now let me show you something that will make your skin crawl. I've been analyzing the genetic data available on Safari Zone Pokémon, and there are patterns that simply don't occur in nature. Let's start with Kangaskhan. Kangaskhan is a Pokémon that has baffled researchers since its discovery. It's a fully formed adult with a baby permanently in its pouch. The baby never grows. The baby never leaves. When Kangaskhan is captured, the baby is captured with it. One Pokémon, two bodies. In later generations, we learn that the baby can temporarily leave during certain moves like Substitute. But it always returns. Always remains in an infant state. Now here's what breaks everything. Kangaskhan doesn't evolve from anything. It doesn't evolve into anything. It's a standalone species. But every Kangaskhan is born with that baby. Every single one. Which means Kangaskhan eggs somehow contain two organisms. A mother and child that develop simultaneously. A biological impossibility. Unless Kangaskhan wasn't naturally occurring. What if Kangaskhan was engineered? A deliberate attempt to create a Pokémon with built-in protection instincts. A species that would always prioritize defense because it had perpetual offspring to defend. Think about it from a research perspective. If you're studying behavioral modification, what better test subject than a Pokémon with hardwired protective instincts? But you can measure baseline aggression, test how stress affects parental behavior, study whether the offspring develops independently or remains in arrested development. And if that offspring never grows, if it remains eternally infant, that suggests developmental manipulation at a genetic level. The kind of manipulation that only happens in a laboratory. But Kangaskhan gets even stranger in Generation 6. Mega Kangaskhan. When Kangaskhan Mega evolves, the baby grows, temporarily achieves a juvenile state, participates in battles. Its ability, parental bond, allows both mother and child to attack. But when Mega Evolution ends, the baby reverts, returns to infancy, goes back into the pouch. Temporary development, triggered by external technology. Reversed when the energy source is removed. That's not evolution. That's activation of dormant genetic sequences. Sequences that were coded into Kangaskhan from the beginning, waiting for the right trigger. And where was that trigger developed? Where was the first research into pushing Pokémon beyond natural limits conducted? The Safari Zone. Now let's talk about Scyther and Pinsir. In Kanto, these are version exclusives. Red and leaf green get Scyther. Blue and fire red get Pinsir. Both are bug flying types with high attack stats. Both are found exclusively in the Safari Zone. But here's what's interesting. They're counterparts, designed to fill the same ecological niche. Similar stats, similar roles. One with blades, one with horns. Why would two species evolve to be so similar, in the same location, competing for the same resources? They wouldn't. Natural selection doesn't create perfect counterparts. Evolution produces variation, not duplication. Unless Scyther and Pinsir weren't products of evolution at all, unless they were deliberate variations of the same baseline. Different expressions of the same genetic template, like control groups and experimental groups. You take a base bug-type genome, modify it in two different directions, release both into the same environment, study which modifications prove more effective. Scyther gets mantis characteristics, speed and slicing attacks. Pinsir gets beetle characteristics, power and crushing attacks. Both get similar base stat totals. Both get similar typing. Both appear at similar levels. Perfect experimental design. And in Generation 2, Scyther gains an evolution. Skyzor, through trading while holding a metal coat, but Pinsir doesn't evolve at all. It remains standalone until Generation 6 when it receives Mega Evolution. Why the discrepancy? Because the Scyther experiment was deemed successful. Further development was authorized. They created an evolution mechanism using artificial items and trading energy. But Pinsir remained unsuccessful, incomplete, shelved until Mega Evolution. Technology could compensate for its developmental limitations. 2 test subjects, 2 outcomes, 1 success, 1 failure, and both originated in the Safari Zone. Let me show you something about the items found in the Safari Zone. Throughout the facility, trainers can find various objects scattered around. TMs, stat boosting items, evolution stones, rare candies. But the distribution is suspicious. In Kanto, you find HM 3 Surf in the secret house at the deepest point of Area 3. You need to navigate the entire facility, burn through your step limit, all to reach this single location and claim the prize. Why would a crucial HM that's required to progress through the region be hidden in a restricted facility? Why would essential technology be locked behind a paywall and a time limit? Because it wasn't originally meant for trainers. HM03 was research equipment. Technology developed in the facility for navigating the water areas where dragon types lived. When the Safari Zone closed, the League needed a cover story, so they turned it into a trainer challenge, a treasure hunt, disguising research equipment as rewards. But that's not all. Throughout the Safari Zone, you find protein, calcium, carbos, iron, max potions, full restores, nuggets, gold teeth. Why would someone's false teeth be in the deepest area of the Safari Zone? The official story is that the Warden lost them. But think about what that implies. Mega Baoba ventured into Area 3, into the most restricted section of the facility, somehow lost his dentures there, and never retrieved them himself. Or he was forced to abandon them, fled from something, left evidence behind. Those teeth are proof he was there when something went wrong. Physical evidence of a hasty evacuation. And you, the trainer, are sent to retrieve them. To clear the area, to ensure nothing dangerous remains. You're not a treasure hunter, you're cleanup crew. Now let's examine the NPCs in the Safari Zone. In the Kanto facility, you encounter very few people. A few scientists. The Warden. That's it. One scientist says, you can keep any item you find on the ground here, but you'll run out of time if you try for all of them at once. Interesting phrasing. You can keep any item you find, as if the items weren't meant for you in the first place, as if they're giving you permission to take research equipment. Another NPC mentions that the Safari Zone is a wildlife preserve, that it's important to protect rare Pokémon. Standard propaganda. But no one explains why you need special balls. No one explains the behavioral mechanics. No one acknowledges that the system doesn't match any other capture method in existence. They give you just enough information to participate, but never enough to question. In the Kanto Safari Zone, Baoba himself is more active. He gives you challenges. It asks you to catch specific Pokemon. Geodude first, then Sandshrew. Why these specific species? Geodude is rock ground type. Common, easy to find, low threat level. Sandshrew is ground type, also common, also low threat. He's testing you, making sure you can successfully capture and handle Pokemon before granting access to deeper facility functions. It's not a game. It's a security clearance system. Once you complete his challenges, he allows customization, lets you place objects, rearrange areas, access the deeper mechanics, but he monitors everything, calls you regularly, provides new objects, tracks your progress. You're not customizing a preserve. You're being given access to research controls, and Baoba is using your data. Every Pokemon you encounter in modified areas, every object placement that successfully attracts rare species, every activation period that triggers new spawns, all of it is data, all of it is research, and you're the unpaid research assistant. In Hoenn, the NPCs are even more telling. The Safari Zone founder wrote a book, 4 chapters detailing the facility's history. Chapter 1, Foundation. A desire to provide the children of the Hoenn region with a chance to encounter many Pokemon welled up inside of me. Noble goal. Educational mission. Standard opening. Chapter 2, Opening. From the very day we opened, a long line wound its way from the Safari Zone. It was a huge success. A desire to make more money off of it welled up inside of me and led to my decision to raise the price of admission. Honesty about greed. Unusual for official documentation, but it continues. Chapter 3, Bankruptcy. Wait. As a result of the higher admission prices, customers stopped coming to the Safari Zone. A desire to save my own hide welled up inside of me and led to my decision to flee under cover of night. Fled under cover of night. Abandoned the facility. Sound familiar? Chapter 4, Rebirth. After I had made my escape, the Safari Zone was reborn thanks to the support of some thoughtful people. Thoughtful people, not investors, not the government, thoughtful people who provided that support, who had interest in maintaining the facility, who benefits from Safari Zone research. The Pokémon League. This book is a confession, hidden in plain sight. The founder admitting he fled, that the facility was rescued by unnamed benefactors, that everything you see is rebirth, not original, built on the ruins of a failure, just like Pal Park, just like every Safari Zone. Let's talk about the berries. In Hoenn's Safari Zone, berry trees grow throughout the facility. You can harvest them, use them to make Pokeblocks. Feed those Pokeblocks to wild Pokemon via feeders. But why are there berry trees in a preserve? Natural vegetation should be wild, uncontrolled, diverse. These trees are planted, cultivated, maintained, and they produce specific berry types. Not random assortments, carefully selected varieties. Berries that modify Pokemon condition, that alter behavioral responses, that change how Pokemon react to training and capture. The berry trees aren't decoration. They're production facilities, growing the raw materials for behavioral modification compounds. And trainers are encouraged to harvest them, to create Pokeblocks, to use them throughout the zone. You're not just a research assistant. You're manufacturing the experimental compounds yourself. Free labor, unpaid participation in ongoing research. And you pay $500 for the privilege. Now let's examine something truly disturbing. The step limit. In Kanto, you get 500 steps in red and blue, 600 in fire red and leaf green. In Hoenn, 500 steps. In Sinnoh's Great Marsh, 500 steps. But in Johto, no step limit at all. Why the change? The official explanation is that it makes the Safari Zone more accessible, less frustrating for trainers, better gameplay. But I think the real reason is contamination risk. Step limits aren't arbitrary. They're exposure limits. Think about nuclear facilities, chemical plants, biological research labs. All of them have strict limits on how long personnel can remain in contaminated areas. Not because of immediate danger necessarily, but because of cumulative exposure. What if the Safari Ball technology produces residual effects? What if the behavioral modification fields that make the special capture mechanics work have side effects on humans? 500 steps, approximately 10 minutes of exposure. Then mandatory evacuation, not for your Pokemon safety, for yours. But Johto removed the limit. Why? Because they refined the technology, reduced the exposure risk, made it safe for extended periods. Or they realized the damage was already done, that trainers were already contaminated, that limiting exposure no longer mattered. Think about the trainers who visited the Kanto Safari Zone. Hundreds, thousands, all exposed to behavioral modification technology, all within range of whatever fields make Safari Balls work differently. What are the long-term effects? What happens to humans exposed to technology designed to manipulate Pokemon psychology? We don't know, because no one's asking, because the League isn't releasing that data. But maybe that explains some things. Why trainers become obsessed with catching them all. Why the urge to capture, collect, organize becomes compulsive. Why the Pokédex, a simple documentation tool, becomes an all-consuming goal. Behavioral modification. Not just on Pokémon, on trainers too, making us complicit, making us participate, making us want to participate. Let me tell you about the encounters. In the Kanto Safari Zone, encounter rates are manipulated based on your Pokédex. If you've already caught a species, its encounter rate remains normal. But if you haven't caught it yet, the rate is halved. This isn't random. This is intentional scarcity. They're making rare Pokémon rarer, making completion harder, forcing you to return repeatedly. Why? Because every visit is another exposure, another session of data collection, another 500 steps under their observation. They don't want you to complete the Safari Zone quickly. They want you to keep coming back, keep paying, keep participating. And the 30 ball limit ensures you can't catch everything in one visit. Even if you encounter every rare species, you probably won't catch them all. The capture rates are too low. The escape rate's too high. You have to return, have to expose yourself repeatedly, have to provide more data. It's not bad game design. It's efficient research design. Now let's talk about what happened to specific Pokémon after the Kanto closure. Chansey becomes available in Cerulean Cave in Kanto. The Unknown Dungeon, where Mewtwo resides. Why would Chansey, a Safari Zone exclusive, suddenly appear in the cave, housing the most powerful artificial Pokémon ever created? Unless Chansey were also artificial, also results of genetic experimentation, relocated to Cerulean Cave because it was already a containment facility for experimental subjects. Mewtwo wasn't the only thing they created there. It was just the most successful, the most powerful, the one they couldn't hide. But Chansey, with their impossible HP values and healing abilities, those they could quietly relocate. Classify as rare wild encounters. Hope no one connected the dots. Tauros becomes breedable, can be hatched from eggs, but only if you already have one. Where did the first Tauros come from? If none exist in the wild outside the Safari Zone, how did they establish a breeding population? Unless the eggs aren't natural reproduction. Unless they're cloning, creating genetic duplicates of Safari Zone specimens. One original Tauros becomes infinite Tauros. One source template propagated endlessly. Why would they need that many copies of the same Pokémon? Control groups. Experimental subjects. Distributed to trainers worldwide. Monitored through the PC system. Data collected on development across thousands of variables. Every trainer with a Tauros becomes a participant. Every battle, every level gain, every stat change recorded. Mass research at global scale. Dratini becomes available through Game Corner prizes in Generation 1. 2,100 coins. An alternative to Safari Zone fishing. But Game Corners are owned by Team Rocket and Kanto. They're using them for criminal operations. Running underground bases. Conducting experiments. What if Team Rocket got access to Safari Zone specimens? What if they have Dratini from the original research? That would explain their obsession with rare Pokémon. their attempts to steal them, their own research programs. They're not just criminals, they're competitors trying to reverse engineer the League's technology, and they're giving away Dratini as prizes. Distributing experimental subjects to gamblers. Seeing what happens when Safari Zone Pokémon integrate with the general population. Indeed, it's deliberate contamination, spreading modified genetics, polluting the natural Pokémon population with artificial specimens. Let's examine the regional differences more carefully. Kanto's Safari Zone had 4 main areas, plus a central hub: water, grassland, and mixed environments. Dragon types hidden in specific fishing spots. Johto's Safari Zone has 6 customizable areas: desert, swamp, forest, peak, wetland, meadow. Can be rearranged in any configuration. Why the change from fixed to modular? Because fixed environments failed. Kanto's static layout couldn't adapt to behavioral changes in test subjects. When Pokémon became unstable, the environment couldn't compensate. Johto's modular design allows dynamic adjustment. If an area becomes problematic, move it, isolate it, reconfigure the facility without full shutdown. It's not customization for trainers. It's adaptive containment. The objects you place, they're not attractants. They're environmental controls. Forest objects increase humidity, provide cover, modify light levels. Peak objects increase elevation, reduce temperature, alter air pressure. Water objects regulate moisture, support aquatic species, enable amphibious behaviors. Each one changes the microclimate, creates specific conditions, triggers specific developmental responses in modified Pokémon. And some Pokémon require areas to be active for 100+ days before appearing. That's not rarity. That's gestation. The objects aren't attracting existing Pokémon. They're creating conditions for Pokémon to be generated. Grown from genetic material stored in the facility. Brought to maturity over months of carefully controlled development. You're not encountering wild Pokémon. You're harvesting lab-grown specimens. And the League is having you do it. Having you validate the process. Proving that artificially generated Pokémon are indistinguishable from natural ones. Because if trainers can't tell the difference, if lab-grown Pokémon act like wild ones, then what's to stop them from replacing natural populations entirely? From controlling not just safari zones, but entire regions? Let me tell you about Sinnoh's Great Marsh. The train system is suspicious. You can ride between 6 areas. But the train has no visible operator, no conductor, no staff. It's automated. Computer controlled, monitoring everyone who boards. The observation platforms have binoculars. You can zoom in on Pokémon from a distance, watch them safely. But who else is watching? Who's on the other end of those optics? Cameras disguised as trainer amenities, recording everything, everyone. The mud that slows you down isn't natural. It's too consistent, too evenly distributed. Real swamps have variation, firm ground and deep mud mixed together. But the Great Marsh's mud is uniform, precisely placed, like it was engineered. because it's not mud. It's a mobility restricting compound deployed throughout the facility to control movement, ensuring trainers follow designated paths, preventing access to restricted areas. You think you're exploring freely, bracing, but you're being guided, channeled, monitored every step. The Great Marsh is the most overtly controlled safari zone, the least subtle, and it's still operating, still collecting data, still monitoring trainers, still running experiments, because by Generation 4, they're confident no one will question it. The Safari Zone model is accepted, normalized, expected. Trainers pay for the privilege of participating in research and think they're just catching Pokémon. Now let's connect this to modern phenomena. In Generation 5, Unova has no Safari Zone. Instead, it has abundant shrine and other hidden grottos, Changhar, areas where rare Pokémon with hidden abilities appear. Hidden abilities. Special traits that only appear in specific circumstances. Abilities that normal members of the species don't have. How do these abilities emerge? What triggers them? The official explanation is genetics, recessive traits, rare expressions. But what if hidden abilities are activated rather than inherited? What if they're dormant genetic sequences coded into Pokémon through generations of Safari Zone research, waiting for the right conditions to activate? And those conditions just happen to occur in specific locations. Dream World, hidden grottos, friend safaris in Kalos, all of them controlled by the League, all of them providing access to modified Pokémon. The Safari Zone research went underground, but it didn't stop. It expanded, spread across entire regions, integrated into wild populations, made invisible. Generation 6 introduces Mega Evolution. We've discussed this. But let me be specific about the stones. Mega stones are found in specific locations, often hidden, often requiring specific conditions to access. And they're version exclusive. Some stones only appear in X, others only in Y. Why would naturally formed stones from ancient cataclysms be version exclusive? They wouldn't. Megastones aren't natural. They're manufactured, created in laboratories, distributed selectively. And the keystone you need to activate them? Given to you by authority figures, gym leaders, champions, League officials. You can't just find a keystone. You have to be given one by someone who's part of the system. It's a control mechanism. Technology that only works for approved trainers, ensuring Mega Evolution remains in League hands. And all of it developed from Safari Zone research, from decades of studying how to push Pokémon beyond natural limits. Generation 7 introduces Z moves. Alola has no Safari Zone. But it has island trials. Trials where you complete challenges, prove yourself worthy, receive Z crystals from kahunas. Again, you can't just find Z crystals. You have to be given them. By officials, after proving yourself, and Z moves require specific poses, dancing, synchronized movement between trainer and Pokémon, behavioral synchronization. the trainer performing ritualized movements that trigger power increases in Pokémon. That's not mysticism. That's refined behavioral modification technology, using human movement to activate responses in Pokémon psychology. 40 years of Safari Zone research into anger counters and eating counters, into rocks and bait triggering behavioral states, all of it leading to technology that lets trainers directly manipulate Pokémon power through physical gestures. Generation 8 brings Dynamax. Galar has no Safari Zone, but it has stadiums, special arenas where Dynamax is possible, powered by energy spots, controlled by the League. You can only Dynamax in specific locations, only under League supervision, only in officially sanctioned battles. Maximum control, maximum surveillance. In the wild area where max raids occur, it's essentially an open-air safari zone. You roam freely, encounter Pokémon without trainers, use special mechanics to catch them. But you're monitored constantly, connected online, every action recorded. The Safari Zone evolved, became the entire region, and nobody questioned it. Because we're conditioned. Decades of Safari Zone exposure made us accept these mechanics as normal. Generation 9 introduces terastallization. Paldea has no Safari Zone, but it has Terra raid dens, crystalline structures throughout the region, where Pokémon undergo Terastal transformation, where their types change entirely, type changing. Not just power increases, fundamental alteration of what the Pokémon is. That's the end game. That's what 50 years of research was building toward. Complete control over Pokémon identity, the ability to change types at will, to rewrite the fundamental nature of species. And it's presented as natural, as regional phenomenon, as something that just happens in Paldea. But Terastal ore is controlled by the Academy, distributed by the League, monitored and regulated, just like Safari Balls, just like Mega Stones, just like Z Crystals, just like Dynamax Bands. Every generation's gimmick follows the same pattern. Research in controlled facilities, refinement over time, integration into League operations, normalization among trainers, expansion to regional scale. The Safari Zone was the prototype, the proof of concept, and it worked. Now let me tell you what I think is currently happening. The Safari Zones haven't all closed. Johto's still operates. But I don't think it's the only one. I think there are new facilities. Hidden ones. Not called Safari Zones anymore. Operating under different names. The Go Park in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Located in Fuchsia City. Same location as the original Safari Zone. It's a transfer facility for Pokémon from Pokémon Go. From the mobile game where you catch Pokémon in the real world. But think about what that means. Pokémon Go uses augmented reality. Places digital Pokémon in real locations. Tracks your movement. Records your position. Monitors your behavior. It's behavioral research at unprecedented scale. Millions of trainers worldwide, all providing data on where they go, what they catch, how they play. And then those Pokémon are transferred to Go Park, The same facility built on the ruins of the Safari Zone. The same location where decades of research occurred. It's not a convenience feature. It's data aggregation, collecting information from millions of real-world capture attempts, analyzing patterns, studying behavior. The Safari Zone went global, became an app, and we downloaded it willingly. Pokémon Home is another example. Cloud storage for Pokémon across all games. Every Pokémon you own, every species you've caught, every stat, every move, every characteristic. All uploaded to centralized servers, accessible by the Pokémon Company. Analyzed, studied. The PC storage system I mentioned earlier, it's not regional anymore. It's global, unified. And the League, or the company, or whoever's really in charge, has access to everything. Every trainer's collection, every Pokemon's data, every breeding result, every battle outcome, every evolution trigger. 50 years of research have led to this. Complete surveillance, total data collection, absolute control. And it all started in a facility north of Fuchsia City, where trainers paid $500 for 30 special balls, where rare Pokemon lived in carefully controlled habitats, where something went catastrophically wrong. Let me ask you one final question. Why do we trust the Pokémon League? Think about it. Really think about it. They control access to powerful Pokémon. They regulate who can train. They determine which moves are legal. They restrict where you can go in each region. They've hidden the truth about safari zones, covered up ecological disasters, classified research projects, monitored trainers without consent. They've developed technology to modify Pokemon behavior, to push them beyond natural limits, to change their fundamental nature. And we just accept it. We buy the badges. We enter the tournaments. We use their technology. We store our Pokemon in their systems. We participate in their research without question, because we were conditioned to, starting with the Safari Zone, starting with the idea that some places require special rules, that some Pokemon need different capture methods, that behavioral modification is acceptable if it's for conservation. We accepted the premise, and everything else followed. Now we're in a world where changing a Pokemon's type is normal. Where making them giant is entertainment. Where fusion and transformation and artificial evolution are just gameplay mechanics. But it's not normal. None of this is normal. It all traces back. All of it. Every modern gimmick. Every control system. Every piece of monitoring technology. Back to Kanto. Back to the Safari Zone. Back to behavioral modification research that went catastrophically wrong. And the League is still running. Still experimenting. Still pushing. They just stopped calling it a Safari Zone. So what do we do with this information? Imagining, that's up to you. You can dismiss it. Call it conspiracy theory. Unnavery, go back to playing the games without thinking. Or you can start questioning. Why do Safari Balls work differently? Why do some Pokemon have impossible biology? Why did Baoba flee? What really happened in Kanto? Why does every generation introduce new ways to modify Pokémon? Why is it always controlled by the League? Why are we never given the full explanation? Start asking these questions. Churgi. Start looking for answers. Start connecting the patterns. Because the Great Safari Zone crisis isn't history. It's ongoing. It's happening right now. In every region. In every game. In every app. The research never stopped. It just became invisible. Hidden behind colorful graphics and friendly narratives. Buried under layers of game mechanics we've been trained not to question. But now you know. You know about the behavioral modification technology. You know about the test subjects. You know about the disasters and cover-ups. You know about the patterns. You know the Safari Zone was never what they claimed. And once you know, once you really understand what you're looking at, you can't unknow it. Every time you see a safari ball in your bag, every time you encounter a Kangaskhan or a Tauros, every time you use Mega Evolution or Dynamax or Terastalization, you'll remember. You'll remember where it came from, what it cost, what they're still hiding. The Safari Zone crisis was never resolved. It was buried, rebranded, expanded, and we're all living in its shadow, participating in research we never consented to, using technology we don't understand, trusting an organization that's been lying for 50 years, but hey, at least we're catching them all, right? That's what matters. That's what we've been conditioned to believe matters. Catch them all. Fill the Pokédex. Complete the collection. Never asking why we're driven to collect. Never questioning the compulsion. Never wondering if that urge was planted. By exposure to behavioral modification technology. By decades of conditioning. By a system designed to make us complicit. The Safari Zone changed us. All of us. Everyone who entered those facilities. Everyone who used those special balls. We became part of the research, part of the experiment, and we're still providing data. Every catch, every battle, every choice. Monitored, analyzed, used. That's the real crisis. Not that the experiment failed, but that it succeeded. Too well. And now there's no going back. The Safari Zone was never about conservation. It was about control. Control over Pokémon. Control over evolution. Control over trainers. And they achieved it. So the next time you pay $500 for 30 safari balls, remember what you're really buying. Access to a research facility. Participation in ongoing experiments. Complicity in a cover-up decades old. And maybe, just maybe, start asking questions. Demand answers. Demand transparency. Demand truth. Or don't. Keep playing. Keep catching. Keep trusting. But at least now you know. The Safari Zone was never safe. It still isn't. And it's everywhere. Thanks for listening. Stay curious. Stay skeptical. And maybe stay out of the Safari Zone. At least until we know what really happened there. Until we know what's still happening. Until we know if we can ever truly escape. The research that started in Kanto all those years ago. Or if we're all just test subjects now, every single one of us, catching them all, being caught ourselves, never realizing the cage was built around us, one safari ball at a time.